What could be more terrifying than being told miles above the sea that the pilots flying your plane are lost? This is exactly what happened to 146 passengers on board a Boeing 737 over the Java Sea in February of 2006. The video you're about to watch tells the fascinating story of what happens when small mistakes begin to slip through the cracks and build up until they become impossible to ignore. This
Close your eyes and imagine, on a normal day, you board a plane with hundreds of other passengers. Your mind is full of plans and expectations, a trip with your family, an important contract waiting to be signed, or simply returning home after a long time away. You sit down in your seat, fasten your seatbelt. Outside, the morning sunlight shines through the window, reflecting on the sparkling wings of the plane. The flight attendant smiles friendly. The captain makes the familiar takeoff announcement. Everything seems safe, familiar, peaceful. But just a few hours later, everything changes. The radio signal is suddenly interrupted. The radar in the control room shows a bright dot, then goes out. Before the passengers can understand what happened, the plane has crashed into a remote sea, hundreds of kilometers from the mainland. And now, you and the lucky survivors must face the cruel truth. Drifting in the endless ocean. No consciousness, no food, no water, no phone. No one knows you're alive. During the day, the sun burns your skin. At night, darkness and cold seep into your every breath. The sound of the waves is like a death knell, a reminder that death can come at any moment. What will you do when all hope seems lost? Will you give up, or will you fight to your last breath? This is not a movie script. This is the real story, terrible, haunting, of Flight 782, a seemingly normal flight, but turned into a terrible tragedy, a story that shows the fragility of human life, and also a testament to the strong will to live that nothing can extinguish. That day, Flight 782 carried 120 passengers and the entire crew. The plane quietly parked on the runway of a bustling international airport, where thousands of people were busy with their own trips. In the waiting room, the air was filled with hustle and bustle and anticipation. A young family was carrying bags, the child giggling because he was about to go on vacation. A man in a neat suit was attentively looking at documents preparing for an important meeting. A newlywed couple, their eyes shining with happiness, took a few photos together before boarding the plane. When the loudspeaker announced, everyone walked with different moods, eager, nervous, even relieved at the thought of the journey about to begin. The door closed, the engine roared. The captain said in a familiar voice, at that moment, no one expected that what lay ahead of them was not a normal destination, but a fateful turn. A short trip that seemed familiar suddenly turned into the most terrifying nightmare of their lives. Every person on Flight 782 has a story to tell. In the row by the window, a young father holds his little daughter's hand. This is the summer vacation he promised to make up for after months of working away from home. The little girl's eyes sparkle, eager to watch the clouds through the plane window. In the row behind, a single mother sits quietly, only a few job applications in her bag. She hopes that after this trip, she will find a new beginning, a better future for her son, who is waiting for her back home. A few rows away, a newly engaged couple smiles constantly, holding hands. They plan to start a new life in another city, where their love will blossom into a small, happy family. And there are many, many other stories. A businessman preparing for an important contract signing, a group of young people eager for their first trip, an old woman carrying a gift for a grandchild they had never met. On that flight, there were 120 people, 120 lives, 120 dreams and hopes. They had no idea that all of them would be drowned and buried in the cold ocean. The smiles, the promises, the plans for tomorrow, all suddenly turned unfinished, leaving a permanent void in the hearts of those waiting behind. At an altitude of more than 10,000 meters, Flight 782 was passing through thick clouds. In the cockpit, the pilot was still communicating normally with the control tower. Everything seemed stable. But then, the first signs of abnormality appeared. Warning lights were flashing. The needle was oscillating abnormally. The captain struggled to adjust the control stick, his voice ringing tensely over the radio. Mayday, Mayday. This is Flight 782. We have a technical problem. Urgent instructions. At the Air Traffic Control Center, a bright dot appeared on the radar screen. Then it began to move abnormally, flickering as if about to disappear. The staff on duty panicked. 782. 782. Please respond. But the only response was a crackling, intermittent sound, then silence. In the passenger cabin, everyone clearly felt the violent shaking. Luggage fell onto the aisle, children cried out. Some passengers hugged their loved ones in panic. Others closed their eyes and prayed. No one understood what was happening, only that the plane was falling freely in the thick black clouds. In just a few short minutes, the last signal from Flight 782 disappeared from the radar. On the control screen, the bright dot disappeared. The entire control room fell into a heavy silence, a terrifying silence, signaling that a tragedy had just begun. The plane plunged into the ocean with the sound of wind and the roar of metal. In just a split second, the entire fuselage collided with the sea like a giant bomb. The seawater broke, white foam rose, and then swallowed the hundreds of tons of steel machine. In the cabin, screams rang out chaotically. Many passengers did not have time to fasten their seatbelts and were thrown violently against the ceiling and the seats in front of them. Some were immediately unconscious. Debris, luggage, and belongings flew in the final chaotic moments. As the fuselage broke apart and sank, cold seawater rushed in. The conscious passengers struggled desperately, trying to find a way out in the rushing water. Screams for help rang out and quickly faded into the vast night. Only a few were lucky enough to escape the cabin, clinging to the remaining debris, seats, broken wings, and a floating part of the fuselage. They surfaced, their chests gasping for air, their eyes wide with panic. All around, the night sea was calm but cruel. Hundreds of kilometers away from the mainland, no lights, no ships, no rescue signals, just darkness, raging waves, and lives swept away. Many people died instantly in the terrible collision. The survivors understood that they had just entered a new war, a war for life in the middle of the endless ocean. In the middle of the vast ocean, darkness fell. Only debris floated on the waves. The survivors clung to anything that was still floating: airplane seats, broken wings, even small pieces of wood. But immediately, another terrible fear arose: hunger and thirst. There was no food, no fresh water. The seawater was salty. Drinking only made the body more thirsty and gradually faint. They knew, without water, after only a few days, death would come. During the day, the sun burned, burning the skin. At night, the cold cut the skin, making the body tremble, teeth chattering. They were exhausted. Their throats were dry, their lips cracked, their breathing weakened. Many began to hallucinate, their mouths constantly calling out the names of their loved ones as if they were right next to them. But in that despair, the human survival instinct arose. When the rain suddenly came, trembling hands hurriedly raised to the sky. They caught every drop of water that fell, sharing it with each other. One person passed it to the other, as if it were the most precious medicine in life. Some people gave their little rainwater to the surviving child. Some took off their shirts and tore them into bandages to shield their companions from the sunday. In the midst of suffering, human love lit up like small flames in the cold night sea. They only had each other, strangers, now tied to the same fate. And it was the raindrops, the weak words of comfort, that kept them alive hour by hour, day by day. In the middle of the endless ocean, the days passed heavily like centuries. During the day, the sun hung like a giant flame above their heads, burning their skin. The dazzling light reflected on the sea surface, making everyone dazzled and dizzy. Their lips were chapped, their tongues were parched, their throats burned. Many were so thirsty that they licked the salty water from their lips, only to become even thirstier. At night, the ocean became a cold coffin. The wind cut through the skin, the cold seeping into every fiber of the body, making the body tremble, teeth chatter. The sound of the waves pounding like a distant funeral drum echoed in the darkness. In the darkness, no one knew what was lurking. Sharks, undertows, or simply a silent death coming from within the body. On the third day, a young man could not hold on, his body limp, his hand falling away from the debris. A cry for help rang out, but in an instant, he was swept away by the waves. On the seventh day, an old woman collapsed, her eyes closed in silence. The rest no longer had the strength to cry, only bowed their heads in mourning and despair. On the 12th day, several other names disappeared as well. One by one, the sea wiped out their lives, as if they had never existed. Hope faded. The remaining people huddled together, their eyes sunken, their skin burned, their breathing shallow. With each name gone, the silence grew heavier, darker. They began to wonder, tomorrow, will it be my turn? The sea did not kill them immediately. It tortured them hour by hour, day by day, until their will was exhausted. And in that long nightmare, only the strongest clung to the fragile thread of life. During the long days of drifting, when their strength was exhausted and hope faded, many passengers began to think of the last thing they could do: write a last note. A piece of paper torn hastily from a small notebook, a smudged plane ticket cover, even a crumpled corner of a tissue, all became places for them to send their last words. A father tremblingly wrote, "My dear daughter, if you read this, remember that I loved you more than anything. Don't be sad because of me. Live strong." A single mother hastily wrote a few words, "Son, I'm sorry I couldn't come back. I tried my best. I love you forever." A couple, instead of crying, held hands and wrote a message together. "We started together, and we will go to the end together. If one day someone finds us, please tell our family that we were happy, even in our last moments. This." The pieces of paper were soaked in salt water, the words blurred with each wave. But they became the last evidence of their existence, evidence of a fight for survival, of love, of family, and of human despair before the merciless sea. No one knew whether those last words would reach their loved ones, but just writing them down helped them feel that, somewhere, there was still a thread connecting them to the world, a fragile thread of hope, keeping their hearts from giving up. After more than 10 days drifting in the ocean, the survivors were exhausted. Their eyes were sunken, their skin was burned, their lips were dry and cracked. They had almost lost all faith that anyone would find them. But then, in the late afternoon, as the sun was setting, someone suddenly shouted, his voice hoarse, "Light, there is light on the horizon." Everyone raised their heads, straining their eyes to look into the distant horizon. Among the white-capped waves, a small, flickering light gradually appeared. It was a fishing boat approaching. Their hearts seemed to explode. Trembling hands hastily tore off their shirts, lit a fire with the remaining wood, and smoke billowed up. Others tried to scream, waved their hands, even though their throats were almost dry. On the boat, the fishermen initially saw only a faint smoke, but then they recognized small figures in the sea. A sailor shouted loudly, "There are people! There are people outside there!" The ship immediately changed course, cutting through the waves and approaching. The sound of the engine echoed in the darkness, like a bell announcing life. The survivors burst into tears. Some fell to their knees, still waving their hands weakly. Others hugged each other, sobbing like children. They understood that, after all, the rescue journey had truly begun. As the fishing boat approached, each person was pulled onto the deck. Their bodies were thin, their clothes were torn, their eyes were sunken, but they shone with joy. Some burst into tears. Some could only gasp for breath in silence. The fishermen hurriedly gave them water, blankets, and pieces of bread. Shaking hands held the bottles of water tightly, cherishing them like treasures. But when they drank, many burst into tears. Tears for surviving, and tears for those who were no longer there. After many days of drifting, they finally returned to land. But it was not an intact return. Their bodies were exhausted from dehydration, from the scorching sun, from the cold nights. There were sunburns on their skin, deep cracks on their lips, and scars in their hearts that would never fade. And most importantly, in their minds, the image of that terrifying moment would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The screams as the plane crashed, the eyes slowly sinking into the sea, the names are erased day by day. Flight 782, from a short, normal journey, has become a collective scar not only for the survivors, but also for the families of the victims. It is a reminder that there are moments that change lives forever. A trip turns into a nightmare. A memory turns into a darkness that haunts a lifetime. Flight 782, a journey that seemed short and normal, turned into a haunting tragedy. In the middle of the endless ocean, those small people experienced extreme fear, hunger, thirst, the scorching sun during the day, and the freezing cold at night. But it is also there, between the boundary of life and death, that we see the light of humanity, shared raindrops, weak words of comfort, last words sent to loved ones. It is proof that, even in despair, people still yearn to love and live on. In the end, a few were rescued. They carried invisible wounds, mental scars that would last a lifetime, and Flight 782 became a collective memory, a wound that would never heal for their families, for their communities, and for the world. This is not just a story of survival, it is a reminder. Life is more fragile than we think. In an instant, everything can change forever. Lost at Sea, Flight 782. A story of survival, a memory never to be forgotten,